Welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to cover the 3 keys to muscle growth. To some of my viewers, these may seem obvious, but to others, it might be useful to understand. You're likely to have the best outcome with your muscle gains if you're focusing on these key things. Firstly, we have to provide an adequate stimulus to our body. This is through an intensive resistance training program that's specific to your goals. In my experience, I've found 6 to 10 working sets per muscle group each week to be enough. I know I mentioned it a lot in past videos, but you have to be training at maximum intensity to fall into these lower trainings volumes. Ultimately, the strongest people in the gym are usually the biggest. However, there is a law of diminishing returns here. An example could be how a powerlifter can do 1 to 3 repetitions of heavy squat, but still have skinny legs. It does happen. I've seen it countless times. There seems to be a threshold you have to reach in terms of volume to gain muscle. I've never met anyone that does 1 set that has gained a large amount of muscle mass. Some purporting that are probably just trying to sell their training programs for a sensationalistic approach. It seems, at least from my research, that the first set offers the most muscular stimulus, the second significantly less, and the third has an even smaller amount. 8-time Mr. Olympia Lee Haney once said, "Exercise to stimulate, not to annihilate." I mean, he looks like he might know a little bit what he's talking about. So think of that when you're next training. Also remember, training has to be specific to you. It's no good doing exercises in a range of motion that is outside of your comfort zone. This can be unsafe and just detract from your training as you gather up injuries. The next key is diet. You need to be able to supply your body with nutrients to meet the demand you place upon it. We need 2 main components to do this. The first is protein in adequate amounts. I recommend you watch my video titled Carnivore Diet Macros to find out how much you should be having. I'll link that below. The next is to give your body enough energy substrate. I prefer fat as a fuel source due to the specific health benefits it can offer. I'm talking about healthy fats here, so butter, tallow, lard, egg yolks, cream, things of that nature. Many of the others are pro-inflammatory, which can make the recovery process of gaining muscle much more challenging. I'll touch on that in a future video, perhaps. Creatine, probably the most well-studied nutrient in regards to exercise performance. For most people following a standard diet, 5 to 10 grams would have some merit, depending on body mass. There's no need to load creatine despite popular belief. In fact, I know people that just sip on it in a drink throughout the day. Some even sprinkle it on their eggs in the morning. And that's some pea cannibalism right there. So sufficient protein and energy intake, that's going to be a key thing here. Leucine is a main stimulator of mTOR, which elicits an effect on protein synthesis. Most people consuming an animal protein-rich diet may only need 20 to 30 grams per meal to reach this leucine threshold. This, again, body weight and body mass dependent. There is a significant amount in dairy, so I think that is important as well. Consuming sufficient taurine to aid exercise performance. Now, it helps us regulate our level of hydration. It reduces myostatin to somewhat reduce the limitations of our maximum muscle that can be gained. The effect is mild, but it's worth using, especially given the price. It aids digestion by regulating the pH balance of our guts, so we can assimilate protein efficiently. If following a proper human diet, we would need less. There is a large amount of fish, organs, and muscle meat. Some people choose to supplement this with doses ranging from 1 to 10 grams per day. However, if you're on any blood pressure medication, check this through your doctor as to not to get a possible doubling up effect. On a side note, taurine also stimulates GABA-A receptors in the brain, which can aid people when trying to settle down at night to sleep. This brings me to the next key, which in my opinion is probably the most important, and that's recovery. You have to take this factor into the forefront of consideration when trying to maximize muscle growth. The reason for this is that for high-level athletes, it seems to be the bottleneck of their capabilities and their training. Ultimately, if we cannot recover, then we cannot make the necessary adaptations to our body based on the training stimulus we're providing it. So how do we ensure we're recovering adequately? Now, apart from the diet aspect I mentioned previously, we need to get enough sleep. This is the time of which our body is in a purely rest and digest state. This lets us assimilate amino acids into proteins, which then rebuild our muscle tissue. Some people buy wearable sleep trackers to monitor this. I'm quite skeptical of these. They might give us an indication of how well we sleep, but we have to consider that how we feel is a much more important factor here. Numbers on a screen are quantitative, but how you feel is much more useful and significant. There's some current speculation as well about EMF and these trackers, so for that reason I choose to stay away until at least conclusive data is apparent. There are many, many recovery methods that have merit. Funnily enough, the best ones are actually free or at least cheap. It doesn't have to be expensive or complicated. So walking, for example, staying physically active, they're crucial. Notice I mentioned walking here, not sprinting up hills and trekking Mount Everest. It has to be gentle enough to just increase oxygen uptake in the muscle and help reduce excess inflammation. If trying to build muscle, you shouldn't be giving the body two signals. Provide it with one obvious stimulus, using resistance training, then use the other modality to support the muscular adaptation process. Something very rarely talked about is the recovery of our mind. It can be quite intense at times when training to muscular failure. Giving yourself the time between sessions to relax your mind, put yourself into the parasympathetic state, just let your mind relax. Find ways to switch off, watch a film, read a book, walk the dog, anything calming which you particularly enjoy. Another thing is foam rolling. It can be useful. It can also help reduce adhesions. Some people call that sticky muscles. It will accelerate blood flow to the muscle tissue, so it's a good way to kickstart your recovery from what you did in the gym. If you don't have a foam roller, you can use a tennis ball, and I've also seen people use rolling pins. To be honest, that sounds painful to me. It's not something I probably want to do right now. Appropriate stretching modalities are also useful. So notice I say appropriate. There is some specificity to this, which is well recorded in the literature. In short, we should do some light dynamic stretch movements prior to exercise to stimulate blood flow and get in tune with your body's mechanics. Then, following exercise, we should be performing longer static stretches. These aren't 5-10 second holds. These are static stretches, and they last between 30 to 60 seconds. The aim is to safely increase the level of difficulty and the range of motion as weeks and months go on. Do it gently. The stretching will improve collagen synthesis in surrounding tissues and force nutrient-rich blood in through the mild occlusion effect that it gives. I'm guilty of not doing this as often as I should, but I can fully appreciate the value of it. I just want to address that some of these recovery methods are just suggestions. You don't have to use all of them, but do what works for you and find what you find makes the best use of your routine. For example, if you're someone that has 30 minutes to work out 3 times a week, adding a lot of these things might be counterproductive and actually reduce your results. This is by the way of neglecting the stimulus aspect of your training, the first point I outlined. You might see influencers online using expensive recovery methods, so that's stem cell transplants, hyperbaric chambers, ice pools, all these sort of things. They might be useful, but the things I mentioned before are primarily important. They're just like supplements, they're just an addition to what you're already doing. So in summary, provide your body with the appropriate stimulus for your goals. Feed your body the nutrients it needs to perform and recover. Allow the recovery to happen. Gains are made outside of the gym. So if anyone has any questions about specific points in this video, comment below and I'll try and get around to answering it. Cheers.